There are moments that divide your life into before and after. For me, that moment was our trip to Vermont in January 2019, not just because of what happened, but because of what we discovered afterward. The disappearances, the bodies never found, the stories from other survivors that began surfacing years later. We were 6 friends from Boston University. Me, James, Mike, our star hockey player, Chris, the computer genius, Sarah, a med student, Alex, an amateur photographer, and Tom, the comedian of the group. Our last adventure together before graduation. One final chance to be young and reckless before the real world swallowed us whole. Shadow Peak Resort had a mixed reputation. It was famous for its challenging slopes and lively nightlife, but also for inexplicable accidents and occasional disappearances that local authorities chalked up to inexperienced skiers getting lost in restricted areas. Had we known the truth behind these accidents, we would have chosen a different place. The snow was perfect that day, the kind that makes experienced skiers smile and beginners tremble. We spent the morning on the main slopes, each descent more exhilarating than the last. Alex took photos constantly, documenting what was supposed to be just another adventure among friends. The first signs were so subtle that they only make sense now, looking back. The ski lift operator who seemed to study our group with excessive interest. The bartender who tensed up when we mentioned exploring lesser-known trails. The way some locals averted their eyes when we passed by. It was at the lodge bar that we saw them for the first time. Taylor and Devon, names that now haunt my nightmares. Taylor was the embodiment of the California dream, tall, blonde, with a flawless tan that seemed out of place in Vermont's winter. Devon was her opposite, porcelain white skin, jet black hair, and those eyes, those impossible blue eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. "You're exactly the kind of group we've been looking for," Taylor said, her dazzling smile, revealing perfectly white, perfectly aligned teeth. There was something almost artificial about her perfection. Experienced skiers who appreciate a real challenge. Devon moved peculiarly, like a dancer, every gesture precise and deliberate. "Devil's Forest is Shadow Peak's best-kept secret," she explained, her melodic voice carrying an accent we couldn't place. "Only the chosen ones have the privilege of knowing it." The sun was setting when we started our hike. The shadows stretched strangely between the trees, creating patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The trail we followed wasn't on any official resort map. The symbols carved into the trees should have been our first real warning. They weren't normal trail markers. They were ancient, deeply etched into the bark, some appearing to be decades old. They formed patterns that made my eyes ache when I tried to understand them. "They're protective marks," Devon explained, noticing my interest. "The Native Americans believed this mountain was sacred, a place where the veil between worlds was thinner." Her smile turned predatory. "They weren't entirely wrong." The bottle Taylor pulled from her backpack looked ancient. Dark glass with strange symbols engraved on its surface. The liquid inside was a deep red, pulsating faintly in the fading light. "It's a local tradition," Taylor explained, her smile now sharper, almost predatory. "A special blend to open the mind to the experience." The smell was sweet, almost nauseating, with metallic undertones that reminded me of blood. Devon began a low chant as the bottle passed around, words in a language that sounded ancient and wrong. I watched in growing horror as my friends drank. The change was subtle at first, dilated pupils, unsteady movements, but their eyes started to glaze over in a way that wasn't natural, wasn't chemical. Mike was the first to fall. He tried to say something, but his words came out slurred, incomprehensible. The others followed quickly, one by one, collapsing into the snow, confusion and fear frozen on their faces. That was when the mask dropped. Taylor's smile transformed into something hungry, almost inhuman. Her teeth looked sharper in the twilight. Devon's eyes, they started to glow an unnatural blue, cold and piercing like ice. "We have a problem," Devon murmured, her accent now unmistakably Eastern European. "This one is still conscious." She studied me the way a scientist might observe an interesting test subject. The men emerged from the shadows like living ghosts. 3 of them, dressed in dark tactical gear, carrying medical equipment and other things. "Handcuffs, ropes, syringes. You weren't supposed to be awake for this," Taylor said, her voice now cold, clinical. "No one should see the preparation." One of the men unzipped a large backpack, revealing advanced medical instruments. Another was already checking Sarah's vitals with disturbing efficiency, making notes on a tablet. "Group A, female, 22 years old, excellent physical condition," he murmured into a communicator. "Estimated value 300K. The horror hit me in waves. This wasn't just human trafficking. It was something far more organized, far more sinister. They were cataloging us, evaluating us, like merchandise. Instinct overpowered rational thought. As they spoke in a foreign language, I grabbed a handful of snow and threw it into the nearest man's eyes. What followed was chaos, a blur of shouts, gunfire, and red-stained snow. I managed to reach Mike, slapping his face hard enough to leave marks. His eyes fluttered open slightly, dazed but conscious. "Trap," he murmured weakly. "Others. I saw others." A shot rang out, slicing through the freezing air. The bullet missed me by inches, close enough to feel its wake. "Don't damage the merchandise," a heavily accented voice barked. "We need them intact." What followed was a nightmare, a desperate chase through the growing darkness. The snow, which had been our playground hours earlier, became a death trap. Every step risked a fall, every decision could be fatal. The voices followed us, some in English, others in Eastern European languages. But the worst part was the laughter. Taylor and Devon seemed to find it all incredibly amusing, their giggles echoing through the forest like the sounds of satisfied predators. Mike, still groggy, understood enough of what was happening to help. We dragged Sarah and Chris as Alex and Tom began to regain consciousness. The intense cold may have worked in our favor, speeding up the metabolism of the drugs. It was during our escape that we saw the others. Through the trees illuminated by the moon, a clearing revealed the true horror. A camouflaged medical van and containers. Containers with medical markings and sounds. Human sounds. "We're not the first," Chris murmured, his voice still sluggish. "And we won't be the last." Later, we discovered the full extent of the nightmare. The investigation uncovered an international network operating in ski resorts across the Northern Hemisphere. Similar disappearances were reported in Canada, Switzerland, France. But trauma doesn't end when you escape. Sometimes it's just the beginning. Mike developed a severe phobia of snow. He can't even open a freezer without having a panic attack. Sarah dropped out of medical school. She says she can't look at medical equipment without seeing those backpacks. Months later, Alex revealed something disturbing. In her last photos from that day, before she lost the camera during the escape, something was wrong. Taylor and Devon weren't fully visible. Their forms were distorted, their faces partially missing. The police investigation uncovered horrors that the media refused to publish. The symbols on the trees weren't Native American. They were far older. Some rescued victims spoke of rituals, sacrifices, something beyond mere human trafficking. Taylor and Devon were never found, but there are reports, rumors, of 2 impossibly beautiful women luring skiers in other resorts, always the same pattern, a blonde and a brunette with those impossible blue eyes offering to show secret trails. I write this not just as a warning, but as a confession. Because the most terrifying truth is this: they are not human. Alex's photos proved it. The police reports confirmed it. Whatever Taylor and Devon are, they are just masks. Masks worn by something much older and much hungrier, and they're still out there, still hunting, still collecting. Last season, 3 groups of skiers disappeared in Aspen. Witnesses spoke of 2 stunning women offering to show them special trails. The snow holds terrible secrets, and some predators don't need claws or fangs, just a dazzling smile and impossibly blue eyes. They say traumatic memories remain frozen in time, preserved like insects in amber. Mine is trapped in the ice of Mirror Lake, along with the screams no one else heard. The lake had always been our refuge. Since we were teenagers, Marcus, Dave, and I kept the tradition of walking across its frozen surface every winter. Marcus was the scientist, a marine biologist obsessed with aquatic ecosystems. Dave was a freelance photographer, always searching for the perfect angle to capture the lake's eerie winter beauty. I was the writer, documenting our adventures on a travel blog that now serves as evidence of the horror we witnessed. The winter of 2023 arrived with unusual violence. Temperatures dropped to record lows, turning Mirror Lake into a vast black sheet of ice that cracked and groaned as if it were alive. The older locals claimed they had never seen anything like it. Later we would discover why they seemed so uneasy when speaking about it. The signs started subtly, almost imperceptibly. First, the animals. The lake was usually full of life: deer drinking from the shore, rabbits crossing the frozen surface, birds flying overhead searching for fish in the ice holes. But that winter everything was different. The silence was absolute, oppressive. The migration patterns have completely changed, Marcus explained, his voice betraying concern. It's like something is keeping the animals away, Dave noticed. Something strange in his photographs, anomalies that he initially blamed on camera defects, shadows that seemed to shift between frames, impossible reflections on the ice, and occasionally what appeared to be a massive dark figure beneath the frozen surface. On the night of January 17th, the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees south. Snow fell in heavy flakes, creating a white curtain that distorted reality. The kind of night that makes you question your own senses. The lake's surface was a black mirror beneath the falling snow. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the ice were responding. Marcus had brought measuring equipment, something about studying abnormal freezing patterns. Dave was experimenting with different camera settings, trying to capture the unnatural glow that seemed to emanate from the ice. That's when we heard it. A sound that shouldn't have existed in that suffocating silence, something heavy being dragged across the ice. "There," Dave whispered, his voice trembling. Between the snow, something is moving. The figure emerged from the white curtain like a nightmare taking shape. At first it looked like a bear, its massive silhouette moving with an unnatural grace, but there was something profoundly wrong with its movements. Bears don't walk like that. Bears don't stop and watch like that. "That's not a bear," Marcus muttered, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Is that some kind of costume?" As the creature drew closer, the details became clearer and more disturbing. It was a man wearing what appeared to be an old bear costume, but something was terribly wrong with it. The fur looked alive, shifting independently of the person wearing it. Through rips in the fabric, we caught glimpses of pale skin, covered in dark scars arranged in circular patterns. But the worst part was what he was dragging, a large black sack, tightly bound with heavy nautical ropes. The sack twitched occasionally, and muffled noises escaped from it. sounds that made our brains scream in horror as they tried to process them. The bear man stopped about 50 meters from us. With deliberate, almost ritualistic movements, he began striking the ice with a large, dark stone that didn't look natural. Each impact echoed through the lake in a way that felt wrong, as if it was striking something beyond the ice itself. Crack, crack, crack. The sound had a hypnotic rhythm, almost musical. It was as if the lake itself was responding, groaning in anticipation. Then the sack moved violently. Through a tear in the fabric, something briefly protruded. A small hand, covered in a pink glove, fingers writhing in silent desperation. "Oh God," Dave whispered, his camera shaking. "That's a..." The wind changed direction, bringing a stench that made my stomach churn, a sickening mix of old blood, damp fur, and something deeper, more primal, the kind of smell that makes your reptilian brain scream danger before your conscious mind even processes it. That was when he stopped hitting the ice and slowly, very slowly, had turned his head toward us, the face behind the torn costume. I still wake up screaming when I dream of that face. His skin was a sickly white, stretched unnaturally tight over, bones that seemed misplaced, twisted in ways that defied logic. His eyes glowed yellow, not like a reflection, but with their own eerie light, with vertical pupils like a cat's. But his smile was the worst. It was too wide, filled with too many teeth, sharp, jagged, uneven, like they had been filed down to points. "Hey!" His voice was shockingly normal, almost cheerful. "Do you guys want to help? There's always room for more in the lake." The sack stopped moving. The bear man took a step toward us, dragging his terrible burden. His movements were wrong, his knees bending in the wrong direction, his joints seeming to move beneath the fur as if he had too many of them. "Kids love playing on the ice," he sang, voice melodic and unnatural, especially when they're underneath it. Survival instinct overrides rational thought. We ran. The ice beneath us creaked and groaned, almost as if it were alive. The snow fell heavier, turning everything into a white whirlwind of terror. His laughter followed us, a sound that started human and ended in something animalistic. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions, as if there were more than one, as if the lake itself was laughing. "You don't understand," his voice echoed through the storm. "The lake must feed. The lake needs fresh dreams." Dave fell first, slipping on the ice. When we helped him up, we saw something horrifying, small handprints, dozens of them, frozen into the surface of the ice, as if children had been pressing against it from below. The news broke 3 days later. Emily Thompson, 8 years old, missing. The photo showed a smiling girl wearing the same pink coat we had glimpsed from the sack. Even in the picture, her eyes seemed to accuse us. Police found the spot where the bear man had struck the ice. The hole had refrozen, but the new ice was darker than the rest. Divers were called in. What they found made some of them quit their jobs. Beneath the lake was a network of natural tunnels. In one of them, they found a macabre collection, dozens, of small personal items preserved in the cold. Hair ties, shoes, toys, all arranged in perfect concentric circles, like a ritual offering. Marcus became obsessed. He spent months researching the lake's history, connecting patterns no one had noticed. Every 5 years, precisely, a child disappears, always in winter. Always on nights of heavy snowfall. "Look at this," he showed me an old file from 1923, a sepia photograph of an abnormal bear hunted by locals. Even in the old image, something looked wrong about the animal. Its anatomy was impossible. Dave contributed his photographic evidence. In his pictures from that night, the bear man appeared distorted, shifting. In some, he seemed to have extra limbs. In others, his form was entirely inhuman. A local historian showed us the journals of the first settlers. The Native Americans called the lake the Dream Eater. In their myths, they spoke of an ancient entity living in the depths, something not human, not animal, but something that could imitate both. It collects skins, one record stated. It uses them to hunt, to lure its prey. But its true form is made of black water and eternal hunger. Divers found more evidence in the submerged caves, walls scratched with deep claw marks as if something huge had constantly been shifting its shape. And skins, dozens of skins. Some from animals, others were clearly human. Horror doesn't end when you escape it. Sometimes it's just the beginning. Dave can't even look at frozen lakes anymore. He developed a severe phobia of ice. Marcus abandoned his marine biology career and moved to Arizona. The nightmares never stop. I dream of the lake's depths where something ancient and hungry waits. I see the children, all of them, through the decades, trapped in an eternal dance beneath the ice. Their eyes glow that same yellow. Their smiles are too wide, too full of teeth. The truth we uncovered is far worse than we ever imagined. The lake isn't haunted. The lake is the haunting. The water is alive. The bear man is just one of its masks, a tool to collect what it truly craves, the innocence, the dreams of children. In the deepest caves, divers found ancient inscriptions, symbols that appear across civilizations, across continents, separated by millennia. All speaking of the same thing: lakes that hunger, waters that collect souls. Winter is coming again. Mirror Lake's ice is thicker than usual, darker. Yesterday, a local child said she saw a funny bear waving at her from the shore. The police increased patrols. They installed security cameras, but they don't understand. This isn't something you can stop with technology or weapons, because the truth is this: the lake is always hungry, always watching, and sometimes on the quietest nights I hear laughter rising from the depths, laughter that sounds almost happy, almost human. Final note, found in an abandoned journal near Mirror Lake, 2024. The ice is thinner this winter. If you look through it, you can see faces smiling back. Emily is down there now, playing with the others. Her eyes shine like his. She looks happy. I think I finally understand why the lake needs children. They are purer, closer to dreams, and the lake needs to dream. There are memories that lodge themselves in your mind like parasites, growing and feeding on your fear over the years. Mine began in the winter of 1994 when I was 8 years old, and it still haunts me to this day, 30 years later. Our vacation home in New Hampshire felt different that winter. It wasn't just the snow, which was denser than usual, or the cold, which seemed to seep into your bones. It was something deeper, more primal, something that made adults lower their voices when talking at night, something that made the neighborhood, dogs howl at nothing. The first signs appeared 3 days after our arrival. Strange footprints in the fresh snow around the house, not animal or human, but something in between. They vanished abruptly, as if whatever had made them had simply evaporated. My father said it was just the wind playing tricks, but I saw the worry in his eyes. At night, the second-floor windows of the Hendersons' house, our supposedly absent neighbors, sometimes glowed with a sickly green light. When I mentioned it at breakfast, my mother turned pale. She had known the Hendersons for 20 years. They never let anyone use their house while they were away in Florida. That particular afternoon, Mike and I were building snow forts. The fog had begun to descend, not naturally, but as if something was pouring it down from the sky. It was dense and slightly greenish, with a metallic smell that made my tongue tingle. Mike, with his 12 years of experience in snowball fights, had built an elaborate fortress. I could hear his laughter as he prepared his arsenal of snowballs, planning his attack as he always did. Mike was predictable like that. He always attacked after 5 minutes of preparation, never more, never less. When 10 minutes passed with no sign of him, something froze in my stomach. It wasn't the cold of the snow, it was that primal fear our ancestors must have felt when they sensed a predator nearby. The silence had changed, as if the snow itself was absorbing all sound. I called his name once, twice, 3 times. Each call sounded more muffled than the last, as if the fog was thickening specifically around my words. That's when I noticed the marks in the snow. Something had been dragged, leaving a wide trail leading toward the Hendersons' house. The woman appeared as if she had materialized from the fog itself. Her light blue dress was completely dry despite the snow. Her skin was too pale, like wet paper stretched over bones that didn't seem to be in the right place. But her eyes were the worst. They were like black holes, sucking in, not just light but sanity as well. "Your brother is waiting for you," she said, her voice sounding like multiple voices whispering in unison. Some of them sounded like children. "He's hurt, we need to help him." Something moved behind her, a tall hooded figure in the second-floor window. It wasn't a normal person. Its proportions were wrong, as if it was too tall and thin to be human. Through the hood I could see a face that was just darkness. The snow beneath my feet began to shift, forming small whirlwinds that seemed to be pulling me toward the house. The air grew even colder, a kind of cold that burned. And then I noticed where the woman stood, the snow wasn't melting. In fact, there were no footprints anywhere except a set of sneaker prints, the same kind Mike wore, led from the house toward the forest. But something was wrong with them. They were deeper than they should have been, as if he had been carrying something heavy, or as if something heavy had been dragging him. "He needs your help," the woman insisted, her voice now closer even though she hadn't moved. Her face began to change. The skin seemed to slip, revealing something dark and glistening underneath. "Come with us." Everyone does in the end. The figure in the window moved, tilting its head at an impossible angle. More figures appeared. In the other windows, all tall, all wrong. Some seemed to have extra limbs, others seemed to have none at all. It was my survival instinct that saved me. I screamed Mike's name with all the force I had, and the sound seemed to tear through the air. The fog twisted as if in pain, and for a moment, a brief, terrible moment, I saw what was really happening. The Hendersons' house wasn't really there. In its place stood something ancient, a structure that looked as if it had been built from bones and shadows, its windows pulsating with a sickly glow. And through those windows I saw faces, dozens of them pressed against the glass as if trying to escape. The woman in blue changed completely. Her disguise fell away, revealing something my mind refuses to fully remember. I recall only the teeth, endless rows of teeth in a face that shouldn't have had so many mouths. I ran. I ran like I had never run before, following Mike's footprints. The fog tried to stop me, becoming so dense it felt like swimming through jelly. Voices, so many voices, called my name, some begging, others threatening. I found Mike collapsed in the snow, violently trembling. His clothes were covered in a dark substance that seemed to move on its own. His eyes were wide, fixed on something behind me that I refused to look at. The police arrived 20 minutes later. The Hendersons' house was exactly as it should have been, locked up, covered in untouched snow. Except for one detail, all the second-floor windows were shattered from the inside. Inside the house, they found disturbing evidence. In the kitchen, remains of meals made from an unknown type of meat. In the basement, children's clothes, dozens of them, some decades old, all stained with the same dark substance we found on Mike's clothes. In the attic, the most horrifying discovery, an improvised darkroom, its walls covered with photographs, pictures of children playing in the snow, all taken from the second-floor windows. Some of the photos were recent, me and Mike over the past few days. Others were much older, far older. The oldest dated back to 1902. The years passed, but the questions remain. Mike was never the same. He developed a pathological fear of snow and refuses to talk about that day. I dove into research, trying to understand what had happened. I found disturbing patterns. Every 30 years exactly, children disappear in that area during intense snowstorms, always preceded by sightings of a woman in blue, always involving the same house, which I later discovered was not really the Hendersons' house. The original house on that land burned down in 1901, taking an entire family with it, except for the eldest daughter, who was found wandering in the snow wearing a blue dress, speaking of the others who lived within the walls. Today, 30 years later, I receive reports of similar sightings in the area. A woman in blue, missing children. And always that greenish fog that seems to have a life of its own. Because the most terrifying truth is this: whatever was in that house is not confined to it. It is spreading. Like a supernatural cancer, it is infecting other houses, other areas. And sometimes on particularly cold nights I hear those voices again, calling, inviting, promising. Because now I know the truth. It wasn't a house. It was a portal. And whatever lives on the other side is always hungry for more children. Final note, found in an abandoned journal near the property, 2024. The voices are louder now, the snow is falling, and she is wearing my brother's face now. We have reached the end of these 3 disturbing stories that reveal the darkest side of winter. If these accounts made you reconsider your next snow hike or look twice at frozen lakes, consider subscribing to the channel for more unexplained stories like these. Your subscription and sharing help us continue to bring real accounts that challenge our understanding of reality. Tell me in the comments, which of the 3 stories impacted you the most? Was it the supernatural presence in whispers in the snow, the psychological terror of tracks in the red snow, or the hidden horrors beneath under the ice? Have you ever had an unexplainable experience in winter? Share your story. Don't forget to leave a like and turn on notifications to be alerted about more disturbing cases like these. Until the next video, if you're still brave enough to come back,